With another season of F1 racing done, let's look back at the season of each driver and team to see who under-delivered or who surprised the field this season. Before the video starts, remember that I'm solely ranking them based on this season, and the ranking is totally subjective. You might have another opinion, which you are perfectly entitled to share in the comments below. The drivers and teams will be ranked within the classic tier system, going from S all the way down to F. Note, I've done the same ranking at the halfway point of the season, and this video will be a second part to it. So I suggest you to check it out to see how I rank the first part of the season for drivers and teams alike. I won't be giving Hülkenberg or De Vries a ranking, as it's unfair to judge them based on the few races they competed in. Now then, on to the video. Alex Albon. The former Red Bull driver has had a solid season, although performances dropped off in the second part of the season, with his last point scoring race going back to Belgium. Although it's worth noting the medical issues he faced and the overall pace of the Williams dropped off compared to the beginning of the season. He still surprised a lot of people by his performances and has earned his place in the sport, proven by the contract he received by Williams. He stays in the C tier of my list as a solid driver on the grid. Fernando Alonso. A lot has already been said about the Spaniard's off-track antics, but the 41-year-old has proven once again himself as one of the best drivers on the grid. He beat teammate Ocon 13-8 in qualifying, and while Ocon has the advantage in terms of race finishes at 13-9, Alonso has suffered a lot of mechanical issues, with the Spaniard estimating that he's lost out on 70 points due to reliability. Taking that into account, it's even more impressive that he finished the season 11 points behind his teammate. A very solid B tier for the two-time world champion, could have reached the A tier with a pole position or a podium during the season. Valtteri Bottas. While the start of the season for the ex-Mercedes driver was very solid, the same cannot be said post-summer break. While the overall pace of the Alphas has dropped off, Zhou also catched up pace-wise to Bottas. The Finnish driver only secured 2 points finishes since Canada, and despite beating his teammate 14-8 in qualifying and 14-7 in races, he only gets into C tier. Pierre Gasly. Despite earning himself a drive at Alpine for next year, 2022 is a season to forget for the Frenchman. The pace of the AlphaTauri wasn't there, which didn't allow for the talent of Gasly to shine. While there were a few highlights, such as P5 in Baku, the overall season has been weak. The even weaker season of his teammate barely pushes Gasly into C tier. Lewis Hamilton. While his streak of winning a race in every season of his career has ended, Hamilton still had a great season, all things considered. After struggling with the car early on, he found his pace and finished the season with 9 podiums, including a streak of 5 consecutive podium finishes. He beat teammate Russell 13-9 in qualifying and barely lost 12-10 in races. He earns the first A tier of this video. Nicolas Latifi. The fact that he's been outperformed by replacement driver Nick De Vries in his one and only race should tell you all about Latifi's season. The Canadian has been woeful all season long, being beaten by Albon 16-4 in races and 19-2 in qualifying. Although his 2 points in Japan pushes him over the two replacement drivers Hülkenberg and De Vries in the Drivers' Championship into 20th place. But that 20th place only earns him the F tier in my ranking. Charles Leclerc. After looking like the early season favorite for the title, Leclerc's season and title hopes quickly dropped off. A mixture of the Ferraris losing their pace, horrible strategy calls and mistakes by Chuck himself decided the title much earlier than what we, as viewers, hoped for. His last win race goes back to Austria and barely finished second in the Drivers' Championship. The Monegasque driver goes into A tier. Kevin Magnussen. The Dane season has had 2 clear highlights, P5 in Bahrain and pole position for a Brazilian sprint race, which are both fantastic results. As for the rest of the performances, they have been less than stellar, due to a mixture of lack of pace from the Haases and incidents caused by the Dane, culminating in him being beaten 16-4 by teammate Mick Schumacher, despite beating the German 16-6 in qualifying. He goes into C tier in front of Albon. Lando Norris. The only driver outside of the top 3 teams to earn a podium this season, Lando has been without a question the best of the rest, proven by him finishing 7th in the Drivers' Championship and carrying McLaren on his back for the fight for 4th in the Constructors' Championship with Alpine. In terms of performances against teammate Ricciardo, Lando's beating the Australian 16-5 in races and an astonishing 20-2 in qualifying. He goes into A tier behind Hamilton. Esteban Ocon. The most interesting midfield fight this season was the fight between the two Alpines. While Ocon was more the embodiment of consistency, Alonso showed more the highs and the lows of what the car was capable of. B tier behind Alonso, as I feel like the Spaniard had more the edge in the second part of the season, although the argument can be made for either drivers. Sergio Pérez. The Mexican had a very intriguing season, and that's putting it lightly. A now perhaps controversial win in Monaco and a dominant win in Singapore alongside 8 podiums would suggest a great season for Red Bull's number 2 driver, but it never felt like he truly could challenge Max for the title. And a few less impressive races, it's easy to see why he lost out on second place in the championship to Leclerc. He still goes into A ranking behind Leclerc. Daniel Ricciardo. The Australian was dropped by McLaren before the summer break and hasn't been picked up by a team, which should tell you all about his season. His record against Lando was already mentioned and was more hindering the team in the fight for P4 rather than helping. He's the first driver in D tier. George Russell. George has been one of the most impressive drivers this season, proving doubters, myself included, wrong. He beat 7-time world champion teammate Lewis Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship, while earning the team's and his first win as well as his first pole position. But he also had a few incidents like in the US or in Singapore. If he can get a few more wins and less incidents, Russell should see himself going into S tier next year, but for now he stays in A. Carlos Sainz. A bad start to the season marked by bad luck with incidents and mechanical issues had some people question the Spaniard's place in Ferrari, but his form has picked up since, with Sainz picking up his first win at Silverstone, and an overall solid, although not great, second half of the season. He sneaks into A tier, just behind Lando. Mick Schumacher. While Mick had the occasional good race here and there, the overall season hasn't been great for the German. I've already talked about his struggles against teammate Magnussen, and while the amount of crashes have decreased compared to 2021, Mick was still amongst the costless drivers in 2022. And with his last point scoring race going back to Austria, it's no surprise that Haas dropped him for 2023. He barely sneaks into D tier. Lance Stroll. The Canadian season hasn't been great by any means, and it wasn't terrible either. During the second part of the season, he's picked up pace, with the highlight being a P6, although overall pace-wise, he's still a long ways behind teammate Vettel. In terms of races, Vettel beat Stroll 10-9 and 13-7 in qualifying. He goes into D tier, but the argument can be made for him to go into F tier. Yuki Tsunoda. Another driver who's had a season to forget, Tsunoda finds himself in the 17th place of the Drivers' Championship, with the Japanese driver only scoring points on 4 different occasions. His head-to-head against teammate Gasly has already been mentioned, and while the AlphaTauri hasn't been great, Tsunoda hasn't been great either. Another driver who barely gets into D. Max Verstappen. One of the most dominant seasons we've ever seen, Max has simply been on another level this season. Breaking the record for most race wins in a season should tell you all about Max's performances. Perhaps the easiest ranking of the video, Max goes straight into S tier. Sebastian Vettel. In his last season, Vettel still shined on occasion, although due to the lack of pace of the Aston Martin, he hasn't been able to step on the podium one last time. A very solid midfield driver, scoring points constantly, and with him having over 70% of Aston Martin's points, he's helped the team fight for P6 in the Constructors' Championship. He goes into C tier, in front of Bottas. Zhou. Similar to Bottas, Zhou struggled mightily in the Alfa Romeo, scoring only one single point since Silverstone, but his performances against teammate Bottas have improved in the second half of the season, which earned him a drive in 2023. The Chinese driver is the last driver in C tier. Now that you have the final drivers ranking, let's move on to the teams and see how they did in the season. Alfa Romeo. Overall, Alfa Romeo have been one of the surprises of the season. Although as mentioned with both of their drivers, the pace of the car has drastically dropped off in the second half of the season. With only 4 points post-summer break, the team barely held on to P6 of the Constructors' Championship. The first part of the season pushes the team into C tier. AlphaTauri. As mentioned with both of their drivers, AlphaTauri have been one of the disappointments of the season, with the team only scoring points here and there is no surprise that they finished P9 of the Constructors' Championship, only beating out Williams. There hasn't been a race all season long where both cars score points. They go into D tier. Alpine. Alpine have been the consistent midfield team of the season, scoring points at every race bar 3. This all accumulated in the French team being in P4 of the Constructors' Championship, which has only been contested due to the lack of reliability and Lando's monster season. Despite the off-track drama and battles between teammates, Alpine is the first team in the A tier. Aston Martin. Opposite to Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin have picked themselves up in the second part of the season and have been the 6th or even 5th best team post-summer break. They have gone from P9 after Hungary to fighting for P6 with the Alfa Romeos. C tier, behind the Alfa Romeos. Ferrari. What more can be said? It has been a clown show all season long, not only losing out on the Constructors' Championship and Leclerc's driver title. The Italians have found themselves in a fight with the Mercs for P2 in the Constructors' Championship. Considering how well they started the season, their last win going back to Silverstone is abysmal. C tier considering the fact that this season should have been their return to glory. Haas. While the season overall has been a step in the right direction for the American team, it hasn't been exceptional either. Other than on a few occasions such as Austria or Bahrain, the team has lacked the pace to truly compete in the midfield. And they have barely finished above the AlphaTauris in the Constructors' Championship. Günther Steiner and company find themselves in the D tier in front of the Red Bull Junior team. McLaren have been slightly disappointing considering people's expectations based on their last season. They are the only team outside of the top 3 to secure a podium and fought all season long with the Alpines for P4, thanks to Lando's fantastic season. B tier for McLaren. Mercedes. Fighting with Ferrari for P2 in the Constructors' Championship and one win all season long isn't what the Mercs are used to, but compared to where they were at the beginning of the season, it is a great consolation prize. A tier. Red Bull. Other than early season reliability issues, Red Bull haven't put a foot wrong and easily wrapped up their first Constructors' Championship since 2013. S tier. Williams still have a long way to go before reaching again the heights of the 90s, as this season they have been once again the worst team on the grid, although they managed to pick up a few points here and there as well as a few Q3s. Hopefully sacking Niki Latifi is the first step in the right direction for the team. D tier. Here are my final rankings. If there's anything you disagree with, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe.